Hey everyone, welcome to the June 21st edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I am David Aragona here with my usual co-host Craig Milkowski as we're looking ahead to some weekend racing on this summer Saturday. Belmont at the Big A is holding an 11 race card, and that's where we're going to focus our attention for this Pick 5 sequence. The stakes race there is the Wild Applause. Craig and I actually did a stakes preview of that race a little bit earlier this week. It's an interesting one to talk about. We're going to dive into it and discuss it a little more in depth than we did in that stakes preview. But it's not the only difficult race in a sequence of 5 that concludes this 11 race card. We're going to begin with the 7th race on the card. It's a claiming 25,000 non-winners of 2 life, then move on to a New York bred allowance race going 6 furlongs on the turf, starter allowance race back on the dirt again for the fillies and mares. Then comes the Wild Applause, and we close things out with the New York bred maiden claimer on the turf with a large field at the end of the day. And Craig, I know I threw you a little bit of a curveball this week. I had some scheduling conflicts and kind of gave you the heads up early on. I probably wasn't going to have the time in the day to handicap another sequence outside of New York. So we're kind of stuck with this aqueduct sequence, but actually a series of pretty interesting races.
Yeah, it's not bad at all. As I looked around the country, it's not like any other sequences really jumped out at me, and this one looked as good as any. So always happy to talk about New York. I always make all of the speed figures for New York. So even though I don't often talk about all the other races, I'm certainly familiar with these horses and ready to go.
And I would say it's a pretty player-friendly sequence because if you're looking through it, I wouldn't say there's any horse that sort of jumps out at you as a single or a horse that's going to be a particularly short price in any of these races. So if you hit it, I think it's the kind of sequence that even if it chalks out a little bit, it's not going to pay that poorly. So you could definitely find some interesting horses to talk about at bigger prices throughout. I think we're going to do that. And I had some enjoyment handicapping this sequence, and hopefully people don't mind us sticking with probably a sequence that we wouldn't normally have talked about if we had a time to choose from among all the tracks. But I still think this is an interesting group of races to discuss at Aqueduct. And with that, let's dive into race 7, which kicks off this late pick 5. As I said, it is a condition claiming race, 25,000 the tag. I'll share my past performances in TimeformUS, Craig. And why don't we begin by talking about the pace projector for this race, because it's kind of got an interesting shape to it, and I think it's a good way to start. There is plenty of speed signed on in here. Some horses maybe haven't been showing the speed that they're capable of in all of their recent starts, so I think recent form and running styles is what you really have to prioritize in handicapping this race, but it does feel like there could be some contention towards the front end.
It is. It's an interesting race. When you look at the TimeformUS running styles, none of the horses are actually listed as leaders or speed, but there's a whole bunch of trackers in here. And there are horses who have shown speed, but don't always have to. And it's just that's kind of leads to that unusual formation that we see. We really don't put horses more than 3 wide. And there were 6 horses pretty close on the early speed rating. So that's why it's stacked up like that. Who knows what this one's going to look like. I think it just leads to tell you that there's definitely going to be some chaos at the beginning. And, you know, even though it says fast paced, I don't know. It might be one of those ones where whoever's the most aggressive is able to kind of control the race because, like you said, there's just no confirmed front runner.
Yeah, Craig, I feel like this is one when I was looking at it where I was a little surprised that fast-paced flag was showing up. And as you say, when you look through the running styles, I'm sure it kind of just tipped over that threshold to be a fast pace. But more than anything, it's just kind of a murky pace scenario. It's really difficult to read. And I think that's the real takeaway from looking at this pace projector. Not so much that it's going to be, 6 horses going all out for the front end, but just unclear who among those 6 is going to be the one that really shows the most early speed. And maybe I should even say 7 horses, because if you had to ask me the one that was most likely to make the front, I would even consider a horse like the number 6, Pascal Moon, who has shown some speed in prior starts. I'll minimize his pace projector to keep it up in the right-hand portion of the screen for reference as we take a look at some of the horses in this race, Craig. And, I think we should probably start the conversation among the contenders with the number 3, Messi the Magician. He has not raced for a claiming tag since he was claimed out of his debut by these connections. And while he won first off the claim for American Countermasi, breaking his maiden in that state-bred maiden special weight back in January. Since then, he's tried winners with very mixed results. Tried a mile last time, just a horse that doesn't want any part of going that distance. I like the turn back for him. I like the class relief. He's just kind of obvious in this race.
He is, and what I really jumped out at me with him is the TimeformUS race ratings from his races, and you can just see. I mean, they're just a string of triple digits of late, and you're not going to find that. There's one or two among the other horses, but nobody's been consistently running in better races like he has. He's run fine. I think the mile was probably too long for him last time, which seems pretty obvious. He was up there battling for the lead. But yeah, he's the kind of horse when I look at a race like this that I want to be against, but I just really couldn't come up with a reason to be. I think he's going to run well.
Yeah, I think when I did my picks for this race, he was my second pick. He's just the kind of horse that's really tough to throw out. I'm not going to take some big stand against him. I don't expect him to offer a ton of value in this race because everything to like about him is plainly obvious looking at the past performances. But I also think there are pretty good reasons to like him in a race like this, where, as you say, the other horses are not necessarily coming out of the toughest races. You mentioned the triple-digit TimeformUS race ratings for all of Messy the Magician's recent races. We can see the race rating for today's race, or at least the preliminary race rating, is a 94. And when you start to compare that to the races that some others are coming out of, they don't quite stack up, or they're a little bit lower class. So it does feel like everyone has to rise to the level of what Messy the Magician has been facing. So he's super logical in here. Looking at some others, Craig, it's kind of interesting to see that we've got a couple of horses that are both making their first starts off the claim for James Ferraro. He's got an uncoupled entry in here, and not the kind of trainer that you typically think is having a lot of success off the claim. But if you follow the New York circuit very closely, James Ferraro is a trainer that can throw out a long shot winner, has had a lot of success, especially throughout this past winter at Aqueduct. I think exceeded some expectations with how his barn did. Actually, there was a turf race recently in New York where he sent out the exacta. I think the runner-up was 44-1. The winner was 8-1. So definitely a barn that can send out some prices. I'm not sure how big of a price that either one of his horses are going to be in this race. Maybe the one that looks a little more logical on paper is the number 6 Pascal Moon, who, like I said, is a horse that I could see being forward on the pace projector. I think his races 2 and 3 back, when he was a little overmatched, make him look slower than he actually is because he couldn't get to the front in those races. But when he's placed at the right class level, he's a threat to be forward throughout in this race.
Yeah, he easily could be on front in the pace projector. It's only, I think, 7 points on the early speed rating, which isn't much. It's about a length, but it makes it look like more because of how tightly bunched everybody was in here. Yeah, he's fine. I don't really like him in here because I wonder if he does get to the front, if how much pressure he's going to face. Like I said, I don't really think it's going to be a super hot pace, but I do think he'll get some pressure. I don't love him, but he's a horse I like. Let me say that again. I don't love him in here, but he can win the race. I do like his new stablemate a little bit better, to be honest. And Venge is a horse who was running way over his head. He's one that had a lot of triple digits. He finally dropped way down to break his maiden last time. But I think you had to like how easily he did it in this last start for Ray Handel. He ran a decent speed figure that day and won easy. So he's taken a step back up in class. But off of that win, I think it's logical. And he seems like he's in a good spot to me. He's a horse who his best races have come from off the pace like last time. And I would imagine he'll kind of be mid-pack in here. And I think he's got a big shot.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you just said, Craig. My one concern with Venge is that the replay that we're taking a look at is his maiden victory last time, and he broke a little bit slowly in this race. He's the number 8 on this occasion, but after not getting into stride very quickly, you can see he advances willingly down the backstretch. He's traveling 5th right now with those 4 horses dueling ahead of him. And he's actually going to swing 5 wide on the turn to make this run to pass them all in the stretch, and really finishes up this race as much the best horse, as he was expected to be, the 7-5 favorite. And like you said, he was taking a big drop in class this day. He also broke slowly 2 back, though. So in both starts for the Ray Handel barn, he didn't break that well. That's a minor concern for me because going back to his prior races for the Roboto barn, I don't remember him ever being a horse that had gait issues. So it seems like it's somewhat of a new phenomenon. Maybe that's not going to be an issue going into now another barn for James Ferraro, but I do just think that he's heading in the right direction right now. Didn't really want the mile two back. And like you said, I mean, he faced better horses and wasn't even disgraced a few times going back to his performances at the maiden special weight level. So I do think he's pretty logical in here, and he would appreciate any pace that does develop in this race. Craig, looking at the others, I kind of had trouble latching on to too many other horses in here. I did give a look to the number one, Bon Chance. He is another horse that's taking a drop in class, coming out of a starter allowance race last time. He's also coming off a layoff. He just feels like a horse that was ready to fire on debut, and his performances since then have gotten worse and worse and worse. And now there's a layoff, and they're dropping him in. It's just hard for me to take a positive view of him kind of getting back on track in this race.
Yeah, I agree with that. I tried to give him a long look too, given the pace setup, and he's a closer. He doesn't have a great late pace rating, but that's because his form has been bad. If you thought he could get back to that, sure, but it's hard. When I saw the comment for the last race, it said jostled early. I said, well, maybe that was an issue with him. I watched the replay. I didn't see anything, to be honest. I didn't watch the head on, but whatever it was, it didn't cost him any ground. He just seems like he's in terrible form. So for me, I'm pretty much going to lean on Venge and Messi the Magician, maybe a little bit of Pascal Moon. The one thing that I was a little, I forgot to bring up when I was talking about him is the 5 seconds against only one win. Now, obviously, this is for non-winners of 2 lifetime, so he's only going to have 1 win, but the 5 seconds worries me a little bit. It seems like he has trouble finishing off the job.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And we have a very similar view of this race, Craig. I would say the exact same thing, that the 2 horses I'd want to lean on are the 2 and the 3, 6 a bit of a backup. Another horse I could throw in as a backup is the number 7, Moazara. He's a horse that I just think they got a little too ambitious with off the claim by Wayne Potts. Now, he was getting this horse from Todd Pletcher, and maybe his form has just kind of fallen apart for the Potts barn, who has been a little cold lately. But still, I think he was in some spots that were just too tough for him. I mean, what chance did he have chasing Barksdale 2 back? And then last time, the winner of that race at Delaware, Patinga's Twin, is actually a pretty nice horse and was a runaway winner that day. So he's really had no chance in his last couple of starts. Even if he gets back to his better races, I don't know if I think he's that good, but let's say Messi the Magician doesn't show up, Craig. I think the standard to be successful in this race isn't as high as you might expect for the class level. So he's the kind of horse that I could make some case for to throw in the mix.
Yeah, that horse Patinga's Twin, actually, he won that race with a 1:14 TimeformUS speed figure. He actually came back to win very recently. I think it was a couple of days ago. He won another starter allowance, romping. Don't have the figure yet, but he's in really good form. So those races at Delaware, at least as far as the winner goes, were strong.
Well, let's move on to the 8th race. So this is over to the turf course. It's a New York bred first level allowance race going 6 furlongs on the outer turf, where we should note, I think the rail is going to be set at 12 feet this week. It's expected to be set at 0 feet on the inner course. So just take note of that. I did see some racing from Thursday as we're recording this on Friday morning. And I would say that the courses seemed pretty fair. Sometimes when those rail settings start getting very close to the hedge or the inner rail, you can see a slight rail bias on the turf. I didn't observe a ton of that yesterday, but it is something that's worth monitoring given those settings this week. Craig, handicapping this race, I think the big question is whether Instamatic, the number 1, is going to be an individual betting interest, or whether or not his entry mate, who is drawn first on the AE list, the number 1A, Big Prankster, draws into the race, because individually, they'd probably be the first and second choices in here on their own. And I was a little conservative setting the morning line on both of them at 2-1. If they're an entry, they're probably going to be a very short price and maybe a pretty formidable entry. But I think that's something that's definitely worth paying attention to before you play the sequence, because I don't have huge knocks against either of these horses. Clearly, though, the post for Big Prankster, if he gets in, would hardly be ideal.
Yeah, it wouldn't be ideal, but given his running style, it's not a nail in the coffin, I would say, and he fits in this field. So if Big Prankster gets in, assuming his entry mate gets in as well, they would be a prohibitive favorite, and deservedly so, because they have the best speed figures in this race. They are just the two most likely winners, in my opinion. It's a shame in this case that they are a coupled entry. Not sure why we're still doing that, but it is what it is, and we'll just have to keep an eye out to see if he draws in.
Yeah, I do want to talk about each of them individually just a little bit, Craig. And maybe since I'm on Big Prankster right now, we could talk about him if he does get into the race. I kind of left him out of my picks, I think, when I was making picks for this. But he's definitely a horse that I would consider a contender if he got in. His race 2 back off the layoff is worth watching, and I'll pull up the replay because I don't know if he was going to win this day, but he really was buried in traffic during the stretch run. I think he's the number 4 on this occasion. And I'll just fast forward to the top of the stretch, and you're going to see him. He's the horse on the rail with those Reeves thoroughbred colors, the white with the green cap, and he's just going to have nowhere to go at any point in the stretch of this race. So if he was going to win, unclear, but not able to achieve maybe his optimal result on this occasion. I was a little disappointed with his performance when he came back off the layoff, or came back second off the layoff last time. I thought bet down to favoritism. He got a better trip, was staying on decently for 4th in a race that was dominated towards the front end, but didn't take the step forward that maybe was expected of him. So he's a horse that I still think has to prove that he justifies the short prices that he's gone off at in a few of his races. Obviously, though, he's a contender. And as for the stablemate, the number 1, Instamatic, just a horse that was obviously highly regarded last year. He's another one that went off at a series of short prices in his early races, and really in every race of his career. He's been under 2-1 in all 4 starts. And it just seems like he's the kind that is finally putting it all together. Came off the layoff to break his maiden last time for trainer Danny Gargan. I thought it was a pretty impressive maiden victory. The jury's still out on how good that field was that he was beating, but when you pass rivals like he did at the top of the stretch, you're showing a pretty nice turn of foot on the turf. And while he is stepping up against winners for the first time here, outside of his stablemate, I don't know if it's the toughest group of winners that you're ever going to see. And he's in those same Reeve thoroughbred colored silks that you're seeing here with the blinkers all the way on the outside, the number 1 horse closing this field down. I just think both of these horses make a certain amount of sense, Craig. I probably prefer Instamatic a little bit, and I would definitely prefer if Big Prankster doesn't get in, because it's always easier to handicap races without an entry.
I agree with you. I prefer Instamatic as well, and hope Big Prankster doesn't get in, because if he gets in, I think all value is gone on the entry. If Instamatic's by himself, you might actually get a little bit. He was a first-time gelding, I believe, if the reporting on that is correct. So I'm impressed by the big jump in speed figures. He's a 3-year-old, so you expect a jump, but it also seems like being gelded did some good. So I think he's very dangerous in this spot. I did want to touch a little on Big Prankster. Something that surprised me was the blue pace figures last time. I really have to check with our tech guy, because I'm not totally sure they're supposed to be blue. When you see the leader figures, it's just a very even line, 108, 108, 110, and 112. It doesn't seem like they should be blue. I don't know why the algorithm would mess up after all these years. Maybe it is correct, but it just looked odd to me. I only mention it because when I see the blue fractions and a closer, I automatically just want to give him a pass for that race, but not sure that really applies to him here.
Well, yeah, Craig, I agree. It does look a little weird when you consider that TimeformUS pace figure line, and we're looking at the chart right now. It does seem fairly even, and when we talk about an even pace figure line, we're basically referencing how the pace figures of the race compare to the final time speed figure, and the final time speed figure, which is kind of like a Bayer speed figure, just on the TimeformUS scale. That's a 112 for the winner power attack, and you can see that his TimeformUS speed figure got knocked down just slightly from that final time number due to that slow pace, or what we're coding as a slow pace. But the 108s, I mean, they're only 4 points lower than the final time fig. So I agree, Craig, a little surprising to see blue fractions for that race, but it is a race that mostly held together towards the front end. So I think from a race flow standpoint, you probably can view it that way. And even though the raw fractions do look fast, 22, 44, and 1, for a race that went in 107 and 1 for the final time, and the winner came home in sub 23, that is going to be a race where it's pretty tough to close from too far back. And I think we've got a few horses that are actually coming out of this race back into this one. So it's definitely worth discussing a little bit, Craig. And while we're on Big Prankster, why don't we talk about some of the other horses that are coming out of that same race? I mean, we got two just to the inside of him in Allied Attack and Jimmy the Tooth, one of which was up close to the pace, just kind of following Power Attack, the winner around the track. The other one, Jimmy the Tooth, just had no early speed and was out the back door early. I don't know what chance he had with the trip he got.
Yeah, of those two, I would definitely prefer Jimmy the Tooth. It was his first start in quite a while. I had been off over 200 days for Mike Maker, and he's a horse who has shown some speed in several of his earlier races. So don't know if this one was just a prep. I don't love the post, but at least he is a 3-year-old. He showed a little finish in the lane, and like I said, the 12 post isn't ideal, but if there's pace up front, and we haven't talked about the pace projector a whole lot, but we do have it coded as one that we expect the pace to be fast. I could see a situation where he's way closer than he was last time and is still finishing off the race. So of the others, Jimmy the Tooth's actually one that I do like in here. Allied Attack, not so much. He was up close to that flow that favored him, as you say, and just had no finish. And kind of the same thing last time in his first try on turf. He was up close to the pace. It wasn't an overly fast pace, and he just had nothing in the last furlong. And those are never the kind of horses that I like.
Yeah, I don't really want Allied Attack in here either. I thought he got a good trip, 2 back in that race that Big Prankster had some trouble in. I think he was actually the horse that was causing Big Prankster to steadier, the horse that Big Prankster was trying to go up the inside of in that race, and it just didn't work out. I agree about Jimmy the Tooth, Craig. I mean, I'll pull up the replay again. I didn't see a big reason why he was so far back in the early stages, and he is the number 2 in this race. And it's worth showing because I think we've got a few horses coming out of here. The 1, 2, I think 3, 5, and 6 who are in this race that we're taking a look at are all back in this field. And you'll see Jimmy the Tooth in those Michael Dub Silk sort of in the middle of the pack with the yellow blinkers. He breaks with the field and just seems to lack early speed and just goes to the back of the pack. You could see Manny Franco pumping on him a little bit. He just couldn't get forward. Maybe it was breaking in the midst of that large field of runners. I mean, he's a horse that's had experience, so he shouldn't be too green. I just thought it was a little strange that he wound up as far back as he did. Craig, I do want to talk about another horse that is coming out of this race, and I can just keep showing the replay and we'll talk about it because I think the replay kind of speaks for itself, and that's Creasa. He's the number 2 in the race we're talking about today. He's the number 6 in this replay, and he's actually the horse that's right ahead of Jimmy the Tooth at the back of the pack right now. And you can see Jimmy the Tooth ranging up outside of Creasa, who is in those green silks with a yellow cap. And I'm going to say just watch the jockey on Creasa because I don't know exactly what's going on here, but it's pretty obvious he's not making a whole lot of effort. I mean, he shook the right rein at him once, twice there, and then he just kind of sits on him all the way to the wire. Jose Gomez riding him this day, and it's not like the race is coming apart, but you could see, Manny Franco's going to work on Jimmy the Tooth to the outside of him, and Creasa's just riding the rail, running into the back of a tiring horse and just getting eased across the finish line. I don't think Creasa was ever winning this race. He might not have even finished in the money in this race, but I just thought the lack of effort was a little strange. He was also in that race 2 back that was won by Icy Flavor. But that was his first return from the layoff. He drew a wide post that day, got a wide trip. I'm not going to be too hard on him. And even the 101 TimeformUS speed figure that he got puts him in the mix. He got another ride 3 back just prior to the layoff that I thought wasn't ideal. He was making a run, gathering some momentum coming through traffic, and had to alter course and lose momentum in the very late stages of that race. So when I start to go through it, I think Creasa's form is a little dirtied up. And while some might view this jockey switch to Romero Mirage as a negative, one thing I know about Romero Mirage is he's going to exert a lot more effort than the jockey did last time because he tends to ride his horses hard. So we'll see if he can work out a trip from the rail on a horse that likes to come from towards the back of the pack. But this horse has some credentials, Craig, and I think we could see a better effort this time at a price.
Yeah, he's a horse I'm actually interested in, and I echo everything you said. I don't think that ride last time was anything nefarious. I kind of went back and watched the head-on, and I think Gomez just kind of looked and saw there was no real path to get through and just kind of wrapped up, which isn't really what you want to hear if you had that horse in the trifecta or even the superfecta. I think you have every right to be mad, but it just seems like a trip where he kind of gave up because it looked like there was no path to get through it to my eyes. But that said, I think he's fine. We've seen Creaser run speed figures that fit at this level before. He does need some pace, but he's probably going to get it in here. And I think we're going to see a much better effort from Creaser. I don't know if he's good enough to beat a horse like Instamatic, but I'm certainly going to give him a shot because he is going to be a price with that 30'd up form.
Craig, anybody else that you've got your eye on this race? Because we could talk about a number of contenders. We haven't even mentioned the horse that I think I had as the second choice on the morning line yet, the number 4, Your Man Alex, who was a debut winner last time. Any interest in him or anybody else in this race?
No, his race just came back kind of slow, and he had a pretty decent setup that day. I get that he's a second choice on the morning line, but he's certainly not my second choice. I'm sticking to whatever part of the entry goes, Jimmy the Tooth and Creaser.
Yeah, the one other horse that I would throw into the mix is the number 3, Hey Mac, It's Jack, who on occasion can post a speed figure that would win this race. I think we saw that back in September of 2022, because we haven't seen this horse compete in over a year. He's been off, what is TimeformUS say, 393 days since the last race, and he was a claim that was voided by the vet the last time. So clearly there have been some issues getting Hey Mac, It's Jack back to the racetrack, but there once was turf sprint ability here. He's coming back in a new barn, that of Jamie Begg, who you can send out some live runners. He's had a good meet so far at Belmont at the Big A, 4 starters, 4 in the exacta. And just kind of interesting to me, Craig, that this horse has attracted Flavien Prat. Feels like coming off of this kind of layoff, you wouldn't reach out to a rider like Flavien Prat unless this horse was training well. And when you look at the workouts, it does seem like this horse has been firing off some quick ones in the morning. One of the workout videos of him was available. I watched it. It just looked like he was traveling in hand, just like a horse that's doing well coming into this race. And horses coming off long layoffs like this, I mean, they can go off at sometimes overlaid prices. Hard to exactly, gauge how much money this horse is going to take, especially with that rider assignment of Pratt. Maybe workout reports will tell some of that story, but he's got the lead, the speed to make the front here, Craig. And while there is other speed in this race, if Hey Mac, It's Jack runs the kind of race that we know he's capable of, he could run this field off its feet.
Yeah, that's a good catch about throwing Pratt. I didn't even really notice that. I kind of dismissed him off of that very long layoff, but I could see it. I think we have that fast pace projection. That one's a little bit iffy. Collected Special, the horse shown in third on our pace projector, is one who's shown he does have high speed, and if he takes the turf, he would certainly give Hey Mac, It's Jack a run for his money for the lead, but there's no guarantee. We've seen many times where these third horses just don't handle the turf. It's not that they lose their speed. It's just not the ideal footing. And the other horse we already talked about, Allied Attack, most of his fast races where he's went to the front were on dirt. Now, maybe they try to revert to that since he hadn't had much success and use more speed on the turf, but we haven't seen it so far in his 2 tries. So I could see a scenario where Hey Mac, It's Jack is all by himself.
Let's move on to the next race of this sequence, race 9. It is a starter allowance event back on the dirt course. This one for the fillies and mares going 6.5 furlongs. And Craig, very competitive race. I found this to be one of the most difficult races to make picks in or to sort through the contenders. I guess a horse that's likely to take some money in here is the number 3, Gav's Dream Girl, who is stepping way up in class. She won an $8,000 beaten claimer 2 back, then stepped up to win a $14,000 condition claimer last time, doing so impressively by nearly 10 lengths. And now she's stepping all the way up to starter allowance company, but those are her only 2 dirt races. So she's 2 for 2 on the dirt after a long string of synthetic and 1 turf try. So maybe she's just a horse that is really taken to the dirt, but she's getting a class test, and I got to think she's going to take money off those 2 blowout victories.
Yeah, I would think so. I'm not sure what to do with her because, I mean, the first race, it had a slow figure. You could say that one might even be a little more impressive. It's had some blue pace figures in there. She was at the back of the pack early, and she ran by those horses like they were standing still in the lane. But that's not that huge of a surprise when you consider it was an $8,000 claiming race. Last race, she was able to stay closer to that slow pace, which I think is a good sign. She ran pretty fast. She won by 9. Her final time speed figure was an 89. She got an 85 TimeformUS speed figure. knocked down because of the pace, but I would count her more as an 89 kind of horse because she has shown she can run from off the lead. That penalty for being up close to the slow pace, I don't know if it really applies to her as much. So as much as I would love to toss her at a short price, I will probably have her on my ticket somewhere because I think her dirt races have been good and by far the best races of her career.
Yeah, and I'm going to show the replay of that last race, Craig, because I think the running line makes it look like she was just sitting on top of a slow pace. But you could see in the early stages of this race, she actually was not forward and had to do some work in the opening quarter mile. Maybe not do so much work. She just kind of dragged Manny Franco up to the lead. But you can kind of see it happen here. She is the number 2 horse, actually breaks last. She's rating in last for the opening furlong, and you can see the leaders aren't going that fast up front. She's clearly aggressive in hand, and she's just going to take Manny Franco right up on through there to take the lead by the time they get to the half-mile pole. So I think it's a better race than maybe it looks on paper, where it seemed like she was just sitting on top of this slow pace and was some front runner that was benefited by the race flow. Based on this replay, I don't think that was the case. It is, though, a very different pace scenario and race shape for her on Saturday, because looking through this field, Craig, there's a lot of speed in this race, a lot of fillies that want to be forward, and she is the one that's shown last on the pace projector, and we know that she can come from the back of the pack. She did it 2 back when she was victorious, but that's not the way she ran her faster speed figure last time. So remains to be seen if she can, run up to this level using that closing style. But you could also say that maybe she's sitting the right trip given how this race is supposed to unfold based on that pace projector.
Yeah, and I think you could also say maybe we haven't seen her best race yet because the pace has been so slow in her 2 dirt tries, and she's won so easily. So maybe she has a 95 in her, which the race rating for this race is only a 92. So I could see her being a contender in here. I said I wanted to be against her, but the more I watched the races and looked at it, I just couldn't get there. I think she's got a real shot in here.
The horse that I have the second choice on the morning line, Craig, actually it's the entry, Blenheim Baby and Golden Degree. You do want to note that Jose Lezcano is named on both of these horses. So due to the rules in New York, one of them is going to be a mandatory scratch. It's up to Linda Rice which horse she runs in this race. I would expect that the more likely starter is Golden Degree, just because Blenheim Baby only ran, 7 days ago, and would be stepping up stepping up out of a claiming race where she didn't run that well. But Golden Degree seems like the stronger contender in here, Craig. I mean, she put on her best Secretariat impression last time, winning by 32 lengths. That was an off the turf race where there wasn't a whole lot of competition, and rare to see that margin of victory. But regardless of how much she won by, it clearly was a big step forward off the claim for Linda Rice. And we've seen Linda be pretty quiet with her Kentucky claims over the past 6 to 8 months or so, really since Saratoga last year. The barn has not had as much success. I know they changed some of those rules in Kentucky, and she doesn't claim as many horses out of there these days, but this is one that she clearly improved off a claim from Keeneland.
Yeah, who knows what to do with that last race. I mean, she did run fast. She got a 96 TimeformUS speed figure, which I think is the best last race in the field. It certainly fits in here. Who knows how good it is, but she's another horse. I would love to hate her, but I just don't think you can dismiss her given the field and the fact that she did run that fast race last time. She's one I'm torn on. I don't love her in here, but it's Linda Rice. She does good with these horses off the claim. She's stepping her up in class, and I suspect she's going to run a pretty good race. She's one who's proven to be able to not come from off the pace. She hasn't really done that before, but most of her early starts, she kind of runs a little bit off, but I do think she needs to be up towards the front. So I think that could be a problem for her, and one that is a reason why I would use her on my tickets, but more as a backup. I prefer a couple others, including the one we already talked about, Gav's Dream Girl.
Yeah, I like you at first, I wanted to dismiss her based on the last race, just looking kind of phony. But when I go back and look at some of her prior races, Craig, I think it's easy to make excuses for some of her races at fairgrounds because she was facing some tough maiden special weight fields. I mean, the likes of Impel, Tipsy Tammy, who didn't ultimately pan out, but looked like a really impressive, promising horse at that time. Helen's Little Sis, that was a strong maiden race 3 back. So, I mean, she's faced some good fields, and I think that this might be the right class level for her. She's clearly capable of facing better horses than she did last time, and she's a little overmatched against Maiden Special Weight and True Allowance Company. So this starter race might be the right fit for her. And Linda Rice is pretty good at finding races that really fit her horses from a class standpoint. So I'm not against her at all. She's definitely one that I want to have in the mix. When you look beyond these horses, though, Craig, I mean, there are a lot of ways to go. There's a lot of speed in this race. Who else were you looking at in here?
Really, the only other horse I'm interested in is the one drawn on the outside, Six Pack Senorita. Her figures fit. She gets a good post. I think she's going to get a nice setup from that outside because, like I said, I do think there's some real speed in here between Golden Degree, Will Be Famous. I don't know. Obviously, Bynum Baby's not going to go if Golden Degree goes. So hard to say on that front, but anyway, she's at the back. Sorry, I'm getting my 1 and 1 A's confused. But the other one is Golden Degree, who it looks like 3 fast horses. So I could see a world where Six Pack Senorita just breaks sharp from the outside like she usually does, sits where she is about on the pace projector, and is able to finish this one off. It's her 3rd start off the layoff. She gets Flavian Pratt, who you would suspect is going to give a good ride. And I think she's pretty dangerous, even more so than the 2 favorites.
Yeah, she's a horse that I had a little bit of affinity for in her recent races, and I think she's kind of proven to be better than maybe she looked at the start of her career, Craig. But I thought she got a really good trip last time and just wasn't quite good enough at this level. She was actually beaten by an uncoupled stablemate, Status Seeker, another Rudy Rodriguez trainee who beat her. And Six Pack Senorita, she traveled well into the race, looked like she was going to pose a real threat to that horse at mid-stretch. And when you watch her run, she's this little horse who's got a really quick action. It doesn't look like she extends her stride very much. She's just got those little legs moving really fast. And it just seems like she has trouble finishing off her races sometimes, even after traveling well into them. So I'm a little bit concerned about her being a win candidate as opposed to a horse that's just going to get another piece of this. But I do view her as one that could work out the right trip, given all the speed, and at least she's got that outside post where she can stalk. And I was kind of thinking along the same lines with the horse that I ended up warming up to a little bit more, Craig, and that's the one right to her inside, the number 7 Spiritual Lady. And she's a little tough to peg because she's coming in from a different circuit. Her trainer, Joe Sharp, she's raced at Oaklawn and recently in Kentucky, and some races that she's contested look a little weaker than this. Others look a little stronger. I think the last race where she stepped up against winners for the first time, that starter allowance event, I know the TimeformUS race rating doesn't look like anything special, 92. But when I look through that field on the chart, there are horses that have come back and validated that speed figure or run a little bit higher in a subsequent race. So I think that was a legitimate performance against similar competition last time. And she's another 3-year-old that has had a lot of chances, but it seems like she might just kind of finally be figuring things out. And they've been riding her more consistently as a stalking type, reserved a little bit earlier, where they tried to use her aggressively early in her career when she wasn't finishing off her races. So I think she might be heading in the right direction. And I also find it intriguing that Joe Sharp has centered in New York. He doesn't run that many horses here, and it's not like they're just sending her to New York to get claimed. She's not in for a tag face. It's a starter allowance race. So she's one that I'd be inclined to take pretty seriously in this spot. And if she's anything around that 8-1 morning line, and this was a tough race to make a morning line for, I think that would be a fair price on her.
Yeah, we'll have to do an Andy Serling lunch bet on this one. 7 and 8.
Yeah. Based on the TimeformUS data, I'm not surprised you wouldn't take as positive a view as me on that horse. But it's a pretty tough race to decipher. It's not the kind of race where I'm going to take a big stand against anybody or say that anybody's pick is totally crazy. I mean, maybe Franny Lou's a little tough to make, but even she has some speed figures that put her in the mix. So it's a pretty tough one to decipher for pick 5 purposes. Let's head on to the stakes event on this card. It is the Wild Applause going the mile distance for the 3-year-old fillies on the inner turf course with those rails set at 0 feet. And 9 runners entered for the turf, Craig. As you mentioned on our preview, 3 from the Chad Brown stable, and Chad Brown always seems to hold a strong hand in these races. And the one he's sending out that probably is the horse to beat is the number 9, Oversubscribed. just on paper, she might not look like anything special, but she's the kind of horse that you really have to upgrade once you start to watch her replays, because the debut race just got no pace to close into, really had no business even crossing the wire in a dead heat for that victory, given her positioning coming into the top of the stretch. But she unleashed a big late run to just get there to share the win. And then last time, I'll start to play that replay, Craig, and let you talk about it. I mean, she got steadied on the far turn, and it was a pretty significant steady that probably cost her a victory.
Yeah, I have no doubt it did cost her the victory. As when we get to it, you're going to see she gets steadied. And it's not just that she gets steadied, it cost her a couple lengths immediately, but she also loses all of her momentum. I mean, you can just noticeably see her stride shortens to almost nothing. And the fact that she's able to still get up and run second in this race is just a really game effort for me. So I have no knocks on this horse. With a furlong to go, it didn't look like there's any way she was going to be better than fourth. And you can see the steady right there. She just loses everything. But showed gameness, showed a real finishing kick, showed the willingness to go through horses. So I think there's a lot to like with oversubscribed. Now, that's not a shocker. She's, I think, the morning line favorite in here at 3-1, but it's a pretty contentious field. And I wouldn't judge her on that 101 TimeformUS speed figure she got for the last effort. The 92 before that is a race that just featured a huge pace upgrade and was really kind of a crapshoot trying to make a figure for that. If anything, I would say the number has come, but that number was a little low because the top two finishers and several others in that race have come back to run better figures in subsequent starts.
Yeah, Craig, I mean, she's a trip horse to be sure, but she's a trip horse that I think isn't exactly flying under the radar. That's why I have her as the morning line favorite. I mean, Chad Brown, Flavian Pratt, Clarvich Stable. So it's a tough one for me because I think that she is better than she looks on paper, but I think that the general consensus among the public that's going to be betting this race is that they all think she's better than she looks on paper too. So she's a horse that's tough for me to peg a fair price on. Is she 25% to win this race? Is she 30% to win this race? I don't know if I'd go that high. So she's not a horse that I'm really expecting to offer value in this spot, but I do think that she is one of the more likely winners of the race. As for the second choice on my line, Gala Brand, she's one that's a little tougher for me to assess because I do think she showed talent last year. She's another horse that likes to come from way at the back of the pack. She's probably even more of a deep closer than oversubscribed is. And I think that it ended up working against her towards the end of the season because she just got way too far back in the early stages of that Miss Grio and was moving too late at the end, probably didn't get going until the race was already gotten away from her. And then the Breeders' Cup, we've talked about that race a few times, Craig. There wasn't a whole lot of pace signed on. It was mostly dominated towards the front end, and she was just always out of position, wide at the back of the pack, was never going to be successful from there. And now she's been off for a long time, and we've seen horses really progress in their speed figures, especially on the turf from their 2-year-old to 3-year-old season. I mean, that's just a regular occurrence in the game. But I also question whether or not she was a horse that was just really precocious last summer, and if she's one that we can expect to show that improvement. If she does, and she runs a 110 TimeformUS speed figure here, she's probably going to win. I just don't know if I expect that to happen.
No, I personally don't expect it to happen because she didn't really progress last year either, even though she was in some tougher spots. You would think her speed figures would be able to improve a little bit. She's been laid off since the Breeders' Cup. And I mean, I guess you can make excuses for the Breeders' Cup, but she didn't really show me anything. I mean, she was at the back of the pack of her own volition, didn't really make a late run. So it's Belmont. She's going to take some money. I won't be shocked if she wins this race, but I don't see any value at all on Gala Brand. So she won't be on my tickets.
There are some other contenders that we should talk about, Craig, including a few horses that could be more forwardly placed, because especially in that situation where the rails are down and it just being a 1-mile race where they head right into that turn, I do think you want to be cognizant of who might get early position, especially it being a turf race in New York, where even if it looks like there's pace on paper, sometimes there isn't. So I don't want to totally discount the number 4 Makenga, who did wire oversubscribed last time. And I think we agree that oversubscribed might have been the better horse on that race. But Makenga's got some dangerous early speed, and she's running some of the fastest speed figures coming in here. So I think she's one to consider. I know you like another horse in this race that could also have some forward positioning, even if not right on the front end.
Yeah, Makenga, she could be dangerous for sure on the front end. I mean, I think if you could bet who would be the leader after the first quarter mile, she'd be like 1-9 in here, because there's just not a lot of other horses who have shown any inclination to go to the front. She shows a ton of inclination to go to the front. So, and she does it setting fast paces with red fraction. So I think it's a given she's going to lead this race, assuming she gets out of the gate. And it's just a matter of, will she get pressured? And I have to wonder if there are 3 Chad Brown entrants, if one of them isn't going to be sent to go. We've seen it before, to not let a horse go up, but it's not a given either, because we know Chad usually sends all of his horses out to win the races. I jokingly post on X all the time about, oh, the second Chad or the third Chad or even the fourth Chad when they win, because he sends them to win. But I have a hard time believing that they're just going to let Makenga go alone out on the front end. And there are a couple horses. I don't think oversubscribed will be that horse to challenge them, but Greyage has shown some speed. Chantilly Roadbroker Maiden and has shown up close and has shown plenty of speed. So I think one of those two would be likely to challenge, but if they don't, Makenga could be dangerous. We've seen it before, and we've seen it on the NYRA circuit many times, where if you let a horse go, they can go wire to wire, as she's proven before.
Yeah, for sure, Craig. And I mean, a horse who could sit the right trip in the pocket in that situation is a horse I know you like in this race, the number 3, Vino Rouge. And I don't disagree with your take on her. I mean, she's never won on the turf. She's 0 for 2 on the surface. But if you go back and watch both of her turf races, I think she ran well each time. And she was facing a pretty tough field in her last start.
Yeah, I liked that race last time. I didn't really like her trip where she was kind of chasing a couple runoff horses and maybe moved a little bit early. I don't think she was going to beat the winner, no-show Sammy Joe, but that one did kind of tighten things up, and it probably cost Vino Rouge second in that race. So I think she ran a little better than it looks, and that was a pretty quick race. The 106 speed figure she ran that day fits very nicely in this field. Unfortunately, we haven't had any runbacks yet, but when you look through the chart of the race, it's not like anybody took these massive jumps, and I think there's any issues with the figure. I think she's pretty good, and I think she's ultimately going to turn out to be a turf horse. I think they got derailed a little bit when she won that off the turf maiden race and kind of took the dirt route, but I think she has more ability on the turf, and I expect her to show it here. And I think she's going to get a pretty good inside trip, stalking whoever is leading and hopefully pressing Makenga.
Yeah, I think if there are negatives with Vino Rouge, Craig, it's that, you know, the Tony Dutra, we know he's a good trainer, but his barn has been pretty quiet for a little while now. And John Velasquez, who was the regular rider of both she and Makenga, has chosen Makenga for this race. Rick Dutra training that horse probably has a lot to do with it. Just getting more opportunities, always going with the barn that has more top horses. But Jose Gomez, he can ride the turf okay. I know I was a little critical of his ride in a prior race we talked about in this podcast, but I mean, Jose Gomez does a decent job. So, I mean, we'll see if he can work out the right trip on this filly. But I think those factors are at least going to ensure that maybe you get a better price on Vino Rouge than you would have if Chad Brown was listed as her trainer, where in that situation, maybe she'd be one of the favorites. And speaking of some of those Chad Brown runners that you were mentioning, Craig, I mean, Greyage is fine. I think we both agree that she's not impossible in this race. She had a minor trip last time in the Wonder Again. I don't think a whole lot of the Wonder Again as a race. I know that was a grade 2 event, and this is a listed stakes race, the Wild Applause, but I don't know if it's really any kind of drop in class, because the Wonder Again field was just a little disappointing, especially when you consider that the heavy morning line favorite or heavy betting favorite didn't really show up. Sweet Rebecca, she was really disappointing in that race, and I think it just made it a slightly easier spot. Grayosh is the gray horse, the number 2 in here, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about as they come around the far turn to the top of the stretch. She's in some traffic, racing in the pocket. There's a moment at an upper stretch where it looks like Manny Franco's trying to split horses. He has to alter course. And I think it's fair to say she lost a little bit of momentum. She was never winning that race. I don't know if she maybe would have finished third if everything had gone perfectly. But she probably was cost a little bit of momentum right here as she tries to go inside, then tries to split between horses. So she's okay. And she did beat her Chad Brown stablemate Chantilly Road when she broke her maiden 2 back. But kind of watching this race and then going back to appreciate that maiden race in April where she won, I wonder if Chantilly Road might be the horse that's moving forward more than her other stablemates are, because she came back and broke her maiden next time in the middle of May and got the job done by half a length. And she got a very good trip in doing so. I'll show the replay of that one as well. The runner-up might have run a little better than she did, Opera de Revel, who was a Chad Brown first-time starter, who might ultimately be pretty good, but that horse was 3 wide around the turns, whereas Chantilly Road was getting that 2 wide stalking trip. But I will say, through the stretch of this race, never looked like Opera de Revel was getting to Chantilly Road. I mean, she really was kicking on, and she just seems like the kind of horse that is figuring the game out start by start. They started her out as a dirt horse and wasn't really taken to that surface. And you can kind of see even in this replay, she's got a really long stride. She just reaches out for the ground and kind of lopes along. I mean, it's a very much a turf action, and no surprise that she's taken a big step forward on the turf. And sometimes these horses that have that turf inclination, it can take them a start or two to figure out how to really run on the turf. And I can kind of see here the light bulb going on as she is not letting this horse get by her, and she is really running through the finish line to hold that advantage from her stablemate through the finish. And kind of looking back at this race again, Craig, maybe it didn't look so strong at the time, but when I pull up the TimeformUS chart for this race, a couple of horses have run back. They have flattered the speed figure, the 4th and 5th place finishers, and the 3rd place finisher, Justin I don't think the speed figure's in here yet. It's not, but she came back and won a maiden race yesterday. So I think that might be a solid field that Chantilly Road beat, and she's going to be that biggest price of the 3 Chads. And I think it's interesting that she's the one that's got the early speed, and also that he's reaching out for a live jock in Joel Rosario for this race. So I don't want to underestimate her chances, and I actually think she could run pretty well in here.
Yeah, I do as well. I don't remember where I had her in my picks. I know she was in there somewhere, but I think she's pretty good and probably better than that speed figure look. She noted the winner yesterday at Belmont at the Big A that came back. Don't have the figure yet, but that horse ran pretty well. And it might be easy to look at her PPs and think that maybe she's the one that will be sent to challenge Makenga. But I don't know if they want to change her running style off that last race. She was pretty comfortable raiding in behind the leader. So I have a feeling if anybody does, it's going to be Grayosh. And I think that would set things up very nicely for Chantilly Road. And I think she's pretty dangerous in here. And she's going to be, I would say, at least double the price of her favored stablemate. So she's definitely one I would use on my tickets.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I don't know how the trips are going to work out. I don't have a strong opinion about that. I try not to worry about it too much in New York, where these turf races and the pace scenarios can be a little bit unpredictable. But I just want to find a horse that I think is moving forward at the right time. And I think that could be Chantilly Road. And I think both of the horses that we went for in this race, Greg, you with Vino Rouge, they're probably going to be nice prices, because I think there are a couple in here, particularly the 2 morning line favorites, that just feel like they have to take some money. And I think it makes a wide open race have a little bit of value. Let's finish up this sequence, moving on to race 11. We're still on the turf course. This is the outer turf course, New York bred, maiden claiming race, $40,000 for the male runners. So I mean, it's an open race, and I think there is one filly in this field that we probably actually should talk about when we get to her. But not a whole lot of form in this race, Craig. And where there is turf form, not really turf form that I want to bet, particularly for a horse like the number 3, Your Mission, who has some of the fastest turf speed figures in the field, but this horse has run out of chances for me. I mean, he's been in some top barns before, Todd Pletcher, Jorge Abreu. hasn't run well, hasn't gotten the job done for them. Now he switched to a lower profile Bard. I didn't think ran that well off the switch last time. So any money he takes in this race is not going to be from me. There are some other horses that are coming out of that same race that he competed in on May 25th that are also in here. I think Sweet Tone is a little bit easier to warm up to coming out of that race because it was sort of the first time that he was in a maiden race at a turf race at the class level where he belongs, and he ran okay. Had I Rad Ortiz that day, but switches to Jose Lezcano here. So not really a negative switch. And I guess if he gets in the number 13 Solo Empire, he achieved the best result of those coming out of that May 25th race, leading early. But he was first-time turf that day, a horse that I actually had some interest in getting on the turf. I was meaning to pick him for a number of races, and then I was off that week when he finally got on the turf. I might have opened up my app to put a little bet in at 67-1, but he held on for second that day. He's one that clearly did move forward on the turf, but now even if he gets into the race, he'd be saddled with a far outside post position that is far from ideal. So not an easy race to sift through the form, Craig.
No, I had in my notes that when you started this race to say, hey, David, I had an emergency come up. I got to run, finish this baby off yourself. But that would have been a pretty bad joke. No, it's one that I don't know. What do you do with that race? I think that's a good starting point. But to me, it's hard to trust anybody out of there. I mean, even Solo Empire, sure, he took to the turf, but it's not like he was, contentious. He got beat by over 6 lengths. The speed figures fit, so it's a tough one. I did note that you made, I believe, a first-time starter, the morning line favorite, which I get because it's Christophe Clement. As I dug deep, I know he does well with first-time starters, but when you look at maiden claiming turf routes, I think he's only 4 for 30. The ROI looks good, but that's because he had 1 16-1 winner in the sample. At Gulfstream Park. So that made it look good, but without that horse, it would not be a good ROI. So I don't particularly love that horse. And a horse I kind of gravitated to, and I wanted to ask you about it because you would be the guy to know. Tom Morley has 2 first-time starters in here, and I thought it was interesting the disparity in morning line odds. And, if this was a small track where the morning line maybe isn't taken quite as seriously, I wouldn't pay much attention to it. But the 5-1 odds on Dancing in the Park really caught my eye for a barn that doesn't win a whole lot first time out and has 2 first-time starters. So what can you tell me about that? Because I was very intrigued with the 10 when I saw that.
I can tell you that I just wanted to get done with this morning line as quickly as possible. I don't have a strong insight into which one of these horses is more alive or training better into the debut. Really, for me, Craig, it was just about the fact that John Velasquez is named on one and Eric Cancel was named on the other. And Tom Morley does use Eric Cancel on some live mounts, but I think if you can get John Velasquez, you're probably putting John Velasquez on a horse that can run a little bit. So I guess that was my thinking. I mean, neither one has like a screaming turf pedigree. Dancing in the Park is by War Dancer, who doesn't do great first time out, but actually has solid turf stats and is a half to a turf winner. And the other one, Temple Creed, Jimmy Creed is just a solid all around sire. Dams by Temple City. Aside from that, there's really not a whole lot of turf pedigree there. It's a homebred. So I mean, it was mostly a guess, Craig. I don't have strong insight into these horses. The only one that I feel like I wasn't guessing on is the 9 Cousin Ed, because I actually saw, I think, 1 or 2 of his workouts. And this horse is actually training okay for the level. On the dirt is what I saw. I don't think I saw the turf workout. And looks like a horse that might actually have a little bit of ability. And a little bit of ability can go a long way in this kind of race. So I think he probably will be the favorite, and he's a horse that I'm not going to be too against in here. He's also got plenty of turf pedigree, Craig, which is kind of hard to come by in this race. He's by Summerfront, who's a solid turf influence in the damn quiet ending. I'll pull up her PPs and formulator. She was a turf horse, and she was a pretty good turf horse, and she's produced a good turf horse in Quiet Out East. And I don't think you need a whole lot more than that to like a horse in this race. So I hear you with the stats. I mean, Christophe Clement, obviously, we know, does great with first-time starters generally. As you said, Maiden Claimer is not his best, the best segment of that stat. But still, I think this horse makes a lot of sense in this race. So he's definitely one that I'm going to use to close out this pick 5. Beyond that horse, Craig, there was only really one other one that I could get interested in that has experience, and that is the lone filly in the field, the number 2, Hold Her Close. And look, her recent form is bad, but it's all dirt form, and it's pretty clear at this point that she is not a dirt horse. And when you scroll down to that lone turf race last year, it was against Maiden Specialweight Company. Maybe not the best Maiden Specialweight Company, but I mean, this isn't exactly the best maiden claiming race, so it's still a drop in class. And she was running on at the end. I mean, it is a turf race, and sometimes these turf running lines where a horse makes up a little bit of ground and is never a threat can look better on paper than they actually are. I'll throw up the replay of this race. I thought she was actually really running at the end of this race. She is, I think, the number 8 in this replay, and I'll just fast forward to the stretch run and coming around the far turn. And I think she's the horse in the yellow silks that is sort of separating herself from those 2 at the back of the pack right now. And I mean, she's going to actually make up some ground through the stretch here. Again, never a threat to the winner, but you can really see that she's striding out over the turf and handling the surface a lot better than she did the dirt. And now she had a prep race on the dirt last time, finally getting back on the turf for the first time in a long time. And especially with the jockey that they've named for this race, which probably isn't ideal for the turf, but is going to ensure a big price. And I talked about James Farrar earlier sending out some live long shots. One of the live long shots he sent out on the turf recently was ridden by this jockey who I think just missed at 44-1. So this is a horse that actually can run a little bit on the turf, and I think she could be the right price. So she's kind of the one interesting horse I could latch onto in this race.
Yeah, unfortunately, I latched onto the same one, so I'm wondering how many other people will. But I still think she'll be a decent price in here. You kind of tipped your hand when you said there was a filly in the race. I had a feeling we were going to land in the same direction. And yeah, it's everything I saw. I thought that turf race was pretty good. She was just a 2-year-old at the time in November. Her form is way dirtied up as a horse who she's just nowhere near the same horse on dirt. I mean, I think the speed figures, when you look at them, they're all at least 20 points lower, when you look at the ones right before and right after. With any improvement, I mean, she could easily win a race like this. And, there's some question marks with the first-time starters, but with the horses who have already run, they just, none of them really scare me. So I think she's a filly with a real chance in here.
Yeah, I probably was a little overboard making her 15-1 in the morning line. She's probably more like a 9 or 10-1 shot. But I mean, I think based on the race she ran last year, Craig, that's more than a fair price on her. So yeah, she's definitely one that I want to include on my tickets. And there aren't that many that I want to use in this race. I mean, she's one, Cousin Ed is one, Sweet Tone could be a backup, and I don't exactly know what to do with the Morley first-time starters. Maybe I'd get slight preference to Dancing in the Park. Unfortunately, we're not going to see the tote board for this race, but there aren't too many horses that I want to stretch too far to make cases for, because a lot of them just don't look very good.
No, I agree with you, particularly your Mission, who you talked enough about already. Run speed figures that fit in here fine, but I just want no parts of a horse like that. So I think we're kind of on the same horses. I would use Cousin Ed as a backup, but I would lean in on Hold Her Close pretty good. And Sweet Tone would be the one out of that other race that I think could contend here, even more so than Solo Empire. I just trust that one a little bit more. It seems like Solo Empire last time was the time, even though he didn't win. He had everything his own way up front, and he was able to hold second, but maybe he's not quite as good as he looked that day.
Yeah, if Solo Empire gets in, he's on my ticket somewhere, because at least he's got the speed to get forward in this race. And I don't know if too many of these horses want to pass. So I think being on the front end might not be the worst place to be, but we'll see if he even gets into the race. It's not an ideal post position. Well, Craig, that brings us to the end of this sequence. I think we've talked about, how we're going to strategize around this a little bit already, but let's just quickly give a summary. I know some of our listeners like to forward to the end and hear which horses we're using in this sequence rather than listen to the whole thing. So I'll let you go first to sum up how you might play this sequence.
Yeah, in the first leg, that 25,000 non-winners at Duke Claimer, I'm going to lean on Venge and Messi the Magician. They would both be A's for me. Maybe I could use Pascal Moon as a backup, but don't really trust that one with the 6 seconds and only one win. So not overly excited to include that one on my ticket. In the allowance race for New York Reds on the turf, I'm like you, hoping Big Prankster doesn't get in because I think it's Instamatic is set to run a pretty big race. He would be an A for me, but it's a price. So would Creasa. The case you made for him is good. I've seen him run good races in the past, and I think he could fall into a pretty good setup. I also like Jimmy the Tooth a little bit. I would definitely have him on my tickets, probably more as like a B type in here. If Big Prankster gets in, not sure what I would do. I may move the entry down a little bit in my rankings just because all value would be gone, but I certainly wouldn't eliminate them because they're going to be pretty dangerous. And the two most likely winners on the same ticket. In that starter allowance race, I like six-pack Senorita from the outside. I think she's going to get a good trip and a good setup, and I think she'll run pretty well. She would be an A for me. I'm assuming Golden Degree is going to go. I wanted to toss that one, but just couldn't really do it. I mean, she ran too well. It's Linda Rice. I'm sure this horse is spotted well. Don't know how legit that last race is, but even without it, she fits in here. And I don't want to dismiss Gav's Dream Girl. I don't know how much value she's really going to offer, but I think there's some upside to her since she switched to dirt. Her figures look a little light, but I think she might actually be better than that. She could get it set up. So it would be those three for me in here. In the stakes race, the Wild Applause, I like Vino Rouge. She would be an A for me. You've talked me into Chantilly Road even more than I liked her originally. So I think I'd have two A's. It would be those two in here. I'm not going to get knocked out of oversubscribed wins because I think that one's pretty good. And I could use Makenga as a backup, as one who could go wire to wire. And then in the last race, that New York bred Maiden Claimer, I would use Sweet Tone. I would use Dancing in the Park. Hold Her Close would be the A. The others would be more like B or C types. And I'd probably use Cousin Ed as well. I don't love him. I don't think he offers any value. But if I made it this far, I don't want to get knocked out by a pretty obvious horse.
Yeah, and for me, in race 7, I would primarily use the 2 and the 3. They're my A's, and then my backups would be the 6 and the 7. In race 8, I agree with Craig about the impact of the entry, but I do want to use the number 2, Creasa, as an A. I think he's good value. I would use Instamatic as an A, and the 3, Hey Mac, It's Jack, he would probably be a B for me. Maybe might upgrade him if I feel like the entry is going to offer particularly bad value if Big Prankster gets in, but we'll see how that plays out. And a horse like the number 12, Jimmy the Tooth, he could also be a backup for me, maybe a B or a C. In the 9th race, I think this is the most difficult one to really narrow down because, like I said, I think there are cases to be made for a lot of horses. My A's would probably be the 1A Golden Degree and the 7 Spiritual Lady. Kind of on the fence about what to do with Gav's Dream Girl, the 3. I'm leaning towards making her a B. Same thing for the number 8, Six-Pack Senorita, who Craig likes. And, this probably is a race where I want to have some coverage to C's as well, because I think there's cases to be made for Roman Goddess, the 4, Perpetual Praise, the 5. I'm a little less inclined to like, Franny Lure will be famous, but this is a race where I'm not going to be surprised if the result was unexpected, because they're all horses that are not so trustworthy. In the 10th race, the Wild Applause, we've covered this one quite a bit. I like the 8, Chantilly Road. I'd probably use her as an A along with her Chad Brown stablemate, the number 9, oversubscribed. Craig's horse, Vino Rouge, would probably be a B for me. And the others would probably be on a lower tier. I could throw Makenga and Grey Ocean onto some tickets, but they're probably more C types that I would just want to get alive to if I'm right in other legs. And then closing things out in the last, Hold Her Close, who probably isn't going to be that 15-1 morning line, but still could be, a square price. She's going to be an A for me. Cousin Ed is an A for me. Everybody else would be on a lower tier. Sweet Tone would probably be a B. I could make Solo Empire a B if he gets into the race. Maybe some of those other firsters would be on a slightly lower tier than that as C's, but that's kind of how I'm viewing the breakdown of the sequence. There's really no horse that I want to strongly lean on, Craig, but if I can be right about some of those races where I'm going too deep with my A's, maybe we could string together an all-A's ticket that pays pretty well.
Yeah, I think this is one, even without any like obvious singles, that you could put together a pretty reasonable ticket without breaking the budget and have a decent chance to hit it, and certainly offer some value, because not only is, other than maybe the entry, if it happens, there's not even going to be any super heavy favorites in here, I don't think. So it should be a pretty decently paying pick 5.
Well, that brings us to the end of this week's TimeformUS Forecast. Just some housekeeping to note. I'm going to be away next week, so I will not be around for either podcast next week. And Craig, I'm just going to leave it up to you about whether or not you want to have a guest on, maybe for a pace cast, or I know the forecast could be a little difficult since you unfortunately are going to be saddled with a little more morning line coverage from my plate. But I'm going to leave that up to you, and maybe you can put something out on social media about that. But I'll be back for the TimeformUS podcast the week after the next one. So everybody, thanks for tuning in to the TimeformUS Forecast this week. Remember, you can always catch these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel.